All right, good stuff. Thanks for joining us for episode number 2 of Strength 4 or the Strength 4 discussion. Today we're continuing on with the conversation of rugby, and excited to have a new coach join us to bring us a different look, different perspective on a new position.
In this episode, we're going to talk about Scrumhalf, as Justin quite rightly mentioned. As you see on the screen, this is for the strength and conditioning people watching. This is a position indicated by the arrow. We'll go into a little bit more detail about what that actually entails. But I think, the thing that we want to get across really is that it's a role that is so vitally important to a team's progress around the field. But the way they behave and the way they act, they somewhat get misinterpreted, or it's a true reflection of who they are when you look at this cartoon. And that is the very definition of a scrum half.
And one of the big reasons why we certainly wanted to invite you in for this conversation, Coach, is following our first presentation with the loose head. You actually called me on a particular point that was made during that conversation about the line out. So if you would, I'd love for you to let's kind of revisit that a little bit. And I think this image in particular was one that you were kind of referencing. So I'd love for you to kind of go back and share what your thoughts were on that.
Sure. And there was one for Graham and for Ed. During your conversation, Graham mentioned he didn't recall any time where you're lifting things in the gym where you look skyward. And he was referring to this picture of lifting in the line out. And I thought about that for quite a while, and maybe that is typical in a gym situation, but in a fluid motion during a game and when people are moving around and stuff, I think it's very weird that he would have said that. Because I think unless you are so confident that you know what the jumper is doing and what the opposition are doing, how could you not physically look up? So I also thought about it from another point of view is, as you lift anything skywards, do you automatically, is it just a reaction that you naturally look up? So this is a question for you and Ed. And the other thing was, I thought about perhaps, could you train yourself maybe to lift in the line out blindfolded? How would that affect the way you lifted? So there's a lot of different aspects to that. Just that one comment about when lifting, do you look up? So that's kind of how our conversation started, Ed. What do you think? What do you think about those comments?
Well, I think that you're kind of spot on when you're talking about the difference between the gym and the field. Nowhere in the comment was, in the gym, do you look up? And you don't look up in the gym. And I'll use for power clean, a press, any kind of pressing movement, you get taught to tuck your chin down, because if your chin's up, you're going to smack yourself in the chin. Smack yourself in the chin, you hit yourself in the nose, you're going to break something. Break teeth, break your nose, split your chin wide open. So you, as a weightlifter or as a lifter in the gym, you get taught to tuck your chin back, drive the bar up and through. Now I use log press a lot of times for my big boys up front, just because of the mobility and everything else. And there you will have to get your head out of the way, look up. But if you lift your head too high in the air in the gym with the weight, because that weight the bar is obviously different than lifting a player, that bar is going to slide back over its center or your center of gravity. So it's going to try to line back up with the hip. That's what you're trying to do, is you're trying to get it to curve back. You're not leaving it sitting out in front of the body. You're bringing it back over. Otherwise, you'd be chasing it. So that's the difference between in the gym and on a pitch. Use a med ball for, the heavier med ball for clean and a press and a release and everything else. But yeah, I mean, you're spot on with the assumption that you can't if you're lifting a line out, you have to look up.
So the technical side is correct from that point of view. The looking up part was debated, really, when I first got there. And the actual deciding factor on whether we looked up or not was how fast you wanted the ball off the top of the lineup. If you remember, we changed the game plan 3 or 4 weeks into the season, and we went to a different way of playing, and we decided to utilize the space around the field. Apologies, I appreciate this is an SSC podcast, but it'll make sense in a moment. We decided that we would play the ball off the top of the lineup quickly, nearly 90% of the time when we were outside the 22, wherever we were on the field. We wanted to make sure that we could get the ball as wide as possible, as fast as possible, and get our very, very fit back of the line out there. So what we worked on was speed getting up in the air. It was actually a speed game, and it was up, 1, 2, down, and it was trained that way, drilled that way. I mean, it was drilled to start with, and then the players took charge of it and they ran with it. The reason we never looked up was that it was just get him up quickly, bring him down quickly. And while he was in the air, when they brought him down, we were looking at the opposition to see if they would sack him or pull him away. And
so my question to Justin and Ed is, when you lift with your arms wide apart because you're lifting two legs, right, or a backside, are you in a stronger position if you did the same thing by closing your hands and lifting one leg? You could get the same boost, you get the same height if you're strong enough. Which would be stronger?
Which are you? Sorry, coach. Just to clarify,
Sorry?
the front lifter.
No,
the front, or both of them.
Both of them. So yeah, if you lift on one leg
at the front and the back,
and your arms are closed, well, you could do front or back. You could have one lift in, just the 2 at the front.
Oh, I see.
And one behind.
Gotcha.
I'm just kind of curious that, are you in a strong position the closer you get together to boost up one leg, or are you in a strong position to boost 2 legs up?
I think for lifting a person, you're going to be stronger, a little bit wider. If you're too narrow, your elbows are going to stay in. They're not going to come out and push out. They're going to stay in here. If you get guys with thicker shoulders, especially your front row boys with the thicker shoulders, a little bit less mobility, they're not going to be able to get their hands in close enough to grab one leg. And then you're looking for timing, trying to get 2 people to grab one person like that from the backside. That's just asking for a little bit of disaster.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's the safety issue, which is paramount. I'm just
Right.
purely curious from a lifting point of view, what would be stronger or quicker? I mean, half the time people put their sausages on, as you can see in this picture, or whatever you call them, what part of the country, and then they don't use them for lifting anyway. They either go below them or above them. So
Yeah.
Later, but did just want to post up this photo that I found and kind of get Ed's thoughts on it. This is obviously I'm sure we'll reserve Coach Barford's comments on or critiques on
He's
this.
going to leap out the screen.
But you know, Ed, from a strength conditioning perspective, right? When you look at this image, especially the one on the right hand side, you know, as a strength coach, I mean, what immediately comes to mind in terms of what needs to be addressed with this example?
Mobility, body position. Why is he leaned over with his head down and a hump in his back? Is he not flexible enough to spread his legs out a little bit more and squat down to the ball?
Yeah.
You know, yeah, that's just a bend at the back and never a bend at the hips. There's going to be no power or no anything on that ball. And with your head down like that, your butt up in the air, you're surely going to get tipped over quickly. All I got to do is brush against you and you're going to fall on your butt.
So it's kind of that bracing in contact kind of.
Well, that's gonna be
and again,
with his rear end and the ground.
Yeah. Yeah, and certainly for the audience, we're not advocating this is the desired desired technique for the scrum half, but as a former scrum half and myself and of course as a strength coach as well, this is definitely something that now we mentioned earlier the distance and the metrics. These days I think the scrum half is one of the more often substituted positions. At most levels, the scrum half might be looking at 60, 70 minutes. Rarely I think are they covering a full 80. Maybe at the younger developmental levels, high school, club rugby, etc., you might get a scrum half that plays the entire game, and this might be more of what you see towards the later half of the match, which again kind of goes back to Coach Costner's comments about mobility and just mobility, flexibility, and actual strength in that position. I put a couple of examples in here, and I'm sure Coach Costner has plenty of others. Just some things that can kind of help those athletes open up, get comfortable, get more hip mobility, to be able to sit comfortably in that position. I know the one thing I couldn't find, Ed, is I know you've got a great ankle mobility exercise that you use for your front rowers all the time. Would have loved to have highlighted that one here as well. But just in terms of mobility, flexibility, what are some other things that you've used that would benefit players in these positions?
So this is I train with Evan Conlon that's playing at Lindenwood. It's a really pretty good little scrum half, and there's things that I address with him, and I've addressed it with other coaches too. Is a lot of coaches get really hell bent on like depth in a squat. Well, this is one of the reasons for the depth in the squat: ankle mobility, knee mobility, hip mobility, thoracic spine mobility. All of that's addressed with a back squat. All of that's addressed with an overhead squat. But to take it further, I'll use a lot of like the lateral, you call it the Cossack squat, lateral squats. In that, I put a bar on their back, plate forward. At first, plate overhead, forward lunge with the plate overhead, elevated front foot lunge. A lot of the high box step ups. So when I was in track at Baylor and at UT San Antonio, I would use high box step ups quite a bit, so that front foot that knee was real far, was nice and forward. There a lot of stress on the ankle and the Achilles, and then driving up, through the posterior chain. I use the lateral squatting, and that we'll use with a barbell on the back so that they have to stay upright, and everything else.
We talk a lot about communication, but we never really address it. How do we communicate with the other players? What are the cues we're looking at? What are they looking at? That is as important as the scrum half going, okay, I'm going to be passing the ball to you. You should know that. But as the first receiver or the receiver, are you seeing the same thing as me?
Do they have noticing skills?
Exactly.
What do you actually notice? What are you actually seeing? Noticing skills.
Yeah. How many times do you see younger players getting hit on the side of the head with the ball because they're not looking? The no look pass in basketball. It's become accepted. When Pete Maravich first started doing it, no one knew what the hell he was doing. The ball got just thrown out of bounds. So that whole communication part to me is open play. All the other stuff, being able to run, the kicking part, all that stuff. But I think that the synchronicity with the other players, as a scrum half in attack, in open play, is paramount. And that really comes as much from being around with the other players, being coherent with them, and then just, playing a week in, week out. And you start to know, when he moves to the right, he's going to flick it over my head, stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I think
it starts in the gymnasium. It starts in the gym with they all get to know each other. They talk to each other. A few weeks ago, on the passing of a former player of ours, coach, I put a video up of our players dancing in a gymnasium.
Oh yes,
we were actually in the next room, never even knew that was happening.
Yeah.
We were literally next door, and we had no idea that film was being made, and opened the door, and that was it. That we didn't know anything was happening, because we didn't notice that all the players had suddenly disappeared. So it happens to coaches too. Coaches can get we can get narrow focused. Players, we have to open it up a little bit as coach. Sorry, coach, go on.
This is an interesting question for Ed and Justin. In the gym, when you're lifting or doing an exercise, is there a different mindset if it's loud and there's music playing to if it's completely quiet?
Oh, I think there's definitely a different mindset. I mean, you can't have, it's not a library. I don't expect them to be quiet. I don't let the music get too far above where I can coach, but I want them to have, I want them to be able to be comfortable in there, and I want communication. And I tried to do that here when I was with the Gold, but it just didn't happen. I'm a big believer in like the front row training together, the back five training together, training with each other. When I went to a little strength coaches conference we have called Summer Strong from Sornex Equipment, we were at the University of South Carolina, and in their weight room, they had the platform set up, and they were one across from each other all the way down. And down here on the end, that was the offensive lineman on one platform and the defensive lineman on the platform across from them. And it went all the way up the way, so that it was always a challenge. You can go back, there's a company called Iron Mind that does a lot of weightlifting videos in that, where weightlifting, Olympic style weightlifting, is very quiet. A lot of technical things happen. Everything is very quiet, and there's not like a powerlifting meet where you're chewing on a bar, banging your head, which is why I did powerlifting. But there's videos in there with some of at the Olympics, while they're there for several weeks prior to getting all their workouts in, getting acclimated, and you would have on the platform here, you would have one of the greatest lifters from Greece when they were a hot shot team for a while. And he was lifting here, and the guy that he was going to be competing against was no more than 8 feet from him on a platform across from him. And down a couple more platforms was the next, and it was a constant, it was nonverbal, but it was a constant challenge of each other. And you want to,
yeah. And even though we did a lot of, to say, indoor gym stuff, lifting, we did it with logs. We had weights and stuff too. But we would lift for, say, 10 minutes, and then we would play rugby for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Then we would go back and we'd lift again, and I'd have a word with Paul Holmes and say, okay, did you see that they couldn't do that as fast as I wanted? Let's work on the next rotation of speeding them up by using something we have over here, lifting the logs quicker or something, and then we'll play rugby again for 10 minutes. So it was an evolving thing, not only for the strength and conditioning coach, but for the players. So nothing was ever really done in a vacuum. And that's not always possible, but certainly during the season, it worked really, really well.
Yeah.
We never just did a strength and conditioning session. It was always paired with playing rugby.
Is there something you can use in a gymnasium that isn't designed for kicking that could be repurposed for kicking? And that's the thing. There used to be when you do lower leg raises, when you sit in the chair and you do lower leg raises, could you repurpose that for kicking using one leg instead of two? Stuff like that.
Can I put something in there just
You can.
to join the question?
Yeah.
For instance, and I know Ed and you, Justin, certainly do this. If you take a medicine ball and you throw that around for a while, and then you go to a basketball, the basketball feels like it weighs nothing at all, right? So I wondered if it's like, I'm not suggesting you go and buy yourself a pair of like Frankenstein shoes and wear them around, put a pair of rugby shoes on afterwards. But is there something similar in that kind of concept that you could do in the gym?
You could use ankle weights, rubber tubing, and everything else, but you can't. If you use too heavy of a weight, you're going to decelerate the leg. You're going to slow the leg down. You're not going to work the fast twitch fibers. You're not going to work that. I used to do, because I trained a couple of punters when I worked in American football. One that punted in the NFL for a while. I learned a lot from Kent. We used to do some knee drive work with like a real light med ball, drop it on his knee, make him drive his knee up. Did a lot of deceleration work so that when he did get his leg up, because he got his leg up, but being able to keep that hamstring healthy. So we would put tubing on the top of the power rack and had ankle cuffs, and we would do speed work with the leg coming down, straight down. Cal Dietz has, Justin, you know that Cal Dietz has the ones that he has where he stretches the band, the big band across the rack. On the bottom, they lay down on the ground and slam, straight-legged, and slam that heel into that band. So you're getting at a deceleration mechanics on the backside, and you're able to do that. It's just like running uphill. If you run uphill and you're doing it for speed development, it's a 2 to 3% grade. If you're running uphill for a strength development, it's a 30 to 40% grade.
Yeah. And I mean, you know, of course, Ed can attest to this, that just our feet are just like our hands. I mean, we're going to be dominant from one side to the other. And so many athletes, you know, if you are a right-footed kicker, your right leg is I would argue naturally more flexible than your left leg. And a lot of times athletes just kind of write it off. They just say, well, it is what it is kind of thing. And by giving that equal attention, you know, getting your non-dominant side just as flexible as your dominant side, kind of allows them to develop that bilateral skill, or that
with an MLR side, with a full professional side, and you walk in as the head coach 4 weeks in and go, all right, it hasn't worked for 4 weeks, we're changing everything. There'd be revolution. But for Ohio, it was like, yeah, let's go with it. Let's do it. Because we built up that trust. And I think the trust comes from the man at the top, whether that's the owner, the CEO, and it works its way down. From a rugby point of view, as the director of rugby, I suspect that the director of rugby and the director of strength and conditioning would work hand in hand. I'm not sure how the hierarchy would work, but I would suggest that the director of rugby will be in charge of the strength and conditioning side of it. But the director of rugby has got no time to sit in the gym all day watching technique, you know. And I think this is where I was so keen to do this, is that it is important. Coaches, rugby coaches, basketball coaches, we don't know everything, you know, but we know people that do. And it's about keeping those communication channels open, having the trust, you know, give them enough rope and say, look, go do what I want you to do. And then go along later and adjust it and fine tune it, but trust the people you have around you, you know.
Eamon, I think you hit the thing on the head. There is that whatever the strength and conditioning coach and the coach, they've got to be on the same plane. So, for instance, we've talked about this, about the Scrumhalf. I think the first thing you've got to do is, as a strength and conditioning coach or as a coach, is to sit down with that player and say, okay, what do you think this position requires?
Yeah.
Number two, all right, do you have these requirements? 3, okay, how are we going to go about getting them? And this is my program. As a strength and conditioning coach, you're going to say, okay, this is what we're going to do. Is that okay with you? We can fine tune it. So that they know what the requirement is, and they know that you're going to be put through it. You can't just show up saying, we're doing these, we're going to do these drills, and we're going to lift like this now, and then tomorrow we're going to do this and that. It's got to be a planned program and a progression, and they've got to know, and you've got to know what you're doing.
Right.
Yeah.
And to do that, you know, it goes through all phases. I mean, it was like abject horror, me listening to Ed on your last podcast, of the lack of transparency between the S&C and the coaches. That's an absolute insanity. You've got to be in the same room. Okay.
Yeah.
Scrum half sucks because he can't pass. You fix it, right? Okay. How do I do that? We'll try this, this, and this. Okay. With that work, coach. Yeah. Okay. Let's go on, and you go through that process. But it's got to be, you know, as you said, I like this to be done to this player. He needs this. You go ahead and do it. That's not my expertise. That's yours.